Welcome to the 12th Peacemakers Circles teleconference. I'm Lisa Nelson. I'm the Communications Coordinator for the Gene Houston Foundation, and I'm very pleased indeed to welcome our featured peacemaker today, David Cobb. Good evening, David.
Good evening. How are you?
Great, thanks. Well, the way this works, Lauren Ginshill Oliver will interview our guest, David Cobb, about corporate citizenship, the funding of our elections, and the mission of Move to Amend the U.S. Constitution. Circle's work has joined with the Gene Houston Foundation to initiate this teleconference to bring greater awareness of the great peacemaker and to bring skills and tools to you to launch Circles. The themes of the teleconference are peace and democracy. First, how to bring peace and democracy into our culture of the U.S., learning from the first democracy created by the great peacemaker. Second, the use of Circle as a way to build and sustain community of respect, of equality, of justice, and of peace. The Foundation believes with Lauren that Circles provide sustaining support for each of us to take our stand for the good, to contribute our talents to our community, and to co-create a culture of peace and sustainable life on Earth. Circles are forming among social artists, mystery school students, and others committed to peace. We are pleased to have all of you join us tonight. We're confident you will be inspired by a vision of the new culture that is possible as the peace-based democracy of the great peacemaker is realized. Let's turn now to an introduction of our eminent peacemaker today, David Cobb. Lauren will introduce you, David, and then Kelly Jane Larson will center the circle. And Lauren will bring us up to date with the story of the great peacemaker, founder of the first democracy in North America with the Iroquois League. Then we'll talk with David Cobb about fresh ways to co-create peace and democracy today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It is my honor and privilege this evening to introduce to you our eminent peacemaker, David Cobb, and welcome to everyone here on this call. David Cobb is a people's lawyer and an engaged citizen. He has sued corporate polluters, lobbied elected officials, run for political office himself, and he's been arrested for nonviolent civil disobedience. David truly believes we must use all the tools in the toolbox to effect the systemic social change that we so desperately need and so richly deserve. David was born in San Leon, Texas. He worked there as a laborer before going to college. He graduated from the University of Houston Law School in 1993 and maintained a successful private law practice in Houston for several years before devoting himself to full-time activism to achieve real democracy in the United States. In 2002, David ran for Attorney General of Texas, pledging to use the office to revoke the charters of corporations that repeatedly violate health, safety, and environmental laws. In 2004, he ran for President of the United States on the Green Party ticket. He initiated a recount in Ohio that helped to launch an election integrity movement against the use of so-called black box electronic voting machines. David is a co-founder of the Move to Amend Coalition, a multiracial and multi-issue effort to amend the U.S. Constitution to abolish the illegitimate court-created doctrines that a corporation is a person with constitutional rights and that money equals political speech. I encourage you after the call to go to www.movetoamend.org to learn more about this very effective, energy-charged organization that's making a big difference. I will ask for, David, your patience a few more minutes as we start with centering and our story. But first, a big, warm welcome to you and greetings to you, David. I'm so glad to have you here on the call with us this evening. And I do know, David, that you can only be with us until 6:30, so we'll expect your colleague, Laura Bonham, to join us at 6 and to continue with us after your departure. So a logistics note to all our participants, please press 5 on your phone pad if you have any technology problems during the call. This signals our maestro master, Yarrow, to come to your assistance. That's 5 on your phone pad. So let's center the circle, and first I will light a candle here and invite you to take 2 or 3 deep breaths to ground ourselves in the circle. Breathe in the light of the candle, and now breathe out the light of the candle to every circle. Let's connect with the light of all circles around the world and connect with all people around the world. May they experience true democracy, happiness, and connection in community. And now I'd like to invite Kelly Jane Larson to offer a chapter from Lao Tzu. Kelly.
Thank you, Lauren. Great power, not clinging to power, has true power. Lesser power, clinging to power, lacks true power. Great power doing nothing has nothing to do. Lesser power doing nothing has an end in view. The good, the truly good do, has no end in view. The right, the very righteous do, has an end in view. And those who act in true obedience to law roll up their sleeves and make the disobedient obey. So, when we lose the way, we find power. Losing power, we find goodness. Losing goodness, we find righteousness. Losing righteousness, we're left with obedience. Obedience to law is the dry husk of loyalty and good faith. Knowing too soon is the barren flower of the way, the beginning of ignorance. So great-minded people abide in the kernel, not the husk, in the fruit, not the flower. Let the one go, keeping the other.
Thank you, Kelly Jane, for that grounding in wisdom. This is a pretty dense argument you just offered. The Lao Tzu does lay out the Taoist values in steeply descending order. The way and its power come first. If we don't have that fully, then we turn to goodness or humane feeling. After that is righteousness, also understood as morality. And a very distant last is obedience, yes, with law and order. So may we all strive to follow the way and experience the power of the way as we renew democracy in the United States. So on tonight's call, I'd like to touch in on the great Peacemaker, and then we'll look forward to hearing from David for about 35 minutes. Please do think about the questions you have for David as he speaks, and also his associate, Laura Bonham, who will join at 6. And consider for yourself, what can we learn today to implement in circles and to co-create a new culture of peace, democracy, and sustainability. Because after we hear David talk, then we will go to 12 minutes in small circles where you can generate among yourselves the questions that you most want to ask, and we'll come back together and you can inquire of Laura the questions, since at that point I'm sure David will be gone. Toward the end of the call, you'll also have a chance to complete your circles with appreciations and self-appreciations. And we'll have some final comments from Laura before we bid one another farewell. So The Great Peacemaker, we have been following the stirring tale of the legendary great Iroquois peacemaker who inspired our founders, those founding fathers of American democracy. They didn't get it all right, but they certainly took some good direction from Hiawatha and the Great Peacemaker. Hiawatha and Peacemaker worked with the people to create a way of living to sustain peace and democracy and to meet the needs of all the people. You'll recall some of the elements of the story where after the 5 original tribes did gather together and agree to enter into a democracy together, then weapons and enmity were buried beneath the great tree of peace. The Peacemaker also envisioned a strong symbol of a watchful eagle atop the great tree of peace, and that eagle had eyes alert to the slightest sign of danger to the tree's roots or to peace. Like that, in Circle, we clear the air before we depart from one another. We are alert to resolve anything that might become a problem. The Great Peacemaker urged people to maintain friendships energetically. Bonds of community were designed to keep alliances strong. These included living together in the Longhouse. That engaged people in daily cooperation and fostered the ideal of sharing all resources equally. You'll recall the one bowl philosophy that Joanne Shenandoah described to us last fall. Also, to keep the community alliances strong, they adopted the condolence ceremony to let go of old insults and wrongs, to mourn one another's grief, because these things foster sympathy and healing. And you'll recall just a couple months back, Jan Sanders did this practice of the condolence ceremony with us. Similarly, in Circle, we address any unclarity or upset immediately to prevent anything that might fester and divide us. The Great Council that the Peacemaker initiated, empowered, and governed the Confederacy. They met at least annually, usually each season, under the Great Tree of Peace. And they had a number of guidelines and checks and balances, including regular meetings, representatives from each tribe with a vote for each tribe. The leadership, there were 2 leaders for each tribe with clear safeguards to assure they act as servants of their people. The leaders were chosen by the women, and they could be removed by the women if they did not act as servants of the people. Women were the Longhouse leaders, and they also headed up the clans, which cut across tribal lines and so united people in a way that was complementary to the tribes. One of the wonderful aspects of the pattern for meetings of the Great Council was that they always opened with thanksgiving. And there's a wonderful Thanksgiving prayer of the Iroquois that we have read once on one of the calls, and I look forward to our doing that again on the next call when we have Loretta Afraid of Bear Cook with us. So, as you see, we study the Great Peacemaker to learn much of how to create a social structure that works to keep peace and democracy among people and to resolve any conflicts that arise quickly with respect and care. We've incorporated many of practices like these in the Circle process. So let us go forth this evening and let us, too, accept the Peacemaker's message to take hold of the good news of peace and power and work to renew our democracy. Thank you very much. And I would like to turn now to David. Welcome, David. I'm so excited to hear where do you want to start? You've been on the road a lot these days. You are speaking about the move to amend our U.S. Constitution day in and day out, and really getting people energized and understanding, how did corporate citizenship arise? How did we get into this mess? Is that a good place to start?
Sure. Well, like with any circle, you can start anywhere, and it will invite an investigation and consideration. So, but please allow me to just start with the word democracy itself, which comes from the Attic Greek, demos meaning the people, and kratia meaning power or rule. And it puts me to mind the reading from Lao Tzu that we began with, which really incorporates and lifts up and understands that real democracy requires a power with one another, that we are we must actually engage ourselves with sharing power, making decisions in a cooperative manner, and then implementing them together. That's what democracy actually means. And it's also important to recognize that for all of the beautiful rhetoric of the founders, a true democracy was not created in the United States, because although the document of the United States Constitution begins with "we the people," the people that they were talking about were only wealthy white male landowners, that the indigenous who were actually already here and whose wisdom gave us the Articles of Confederation that were premised upon and modeled after the Articles of the Iroquois Confederacy, as you pointed out, that at the very beginning, the indigenous were subject to intentional deliberate genocide, that the Constitution actually allowed and facilitated the enslavement of Africans who were forced to build this country with slave labor. The United States Constitution actually facilitated and allowed the subjugation of women and the exploitation and oppression of working-class white people. So the entire history of the United States has been an effort to create a more democratic society, and so we believe that Move to Amend, that we are just in the next stage of the growing movements for peace, justice, democracy, and ecology that is possible in this country, but we've never actually had. And so it becomes necessary to understand and to participate as fully as possible with an open heart and open mind, and recognizing that although a true democracy is what we seek, there is not a democracy to return to in this country, but one that we must create together.
I really appreciate that, David. You're talking about the next stage. You really help us see this is an evolution, and we're absolutely on the path, but we've never been there before. Thank you. Yeah.
And I also think it's important to recognize and understand that this notion of a corporation having constitutional rights is an absolute fabrication. The Supreme Court created this idea. It was not part of our original Constitution. It has never been part of a democratic political process. And that constitutional rights is really important because, yes, we at Move to Amend, and I suspect everyone in circles believes and understands and knows that we want to have democracy where the people rule. We also don't want to allow the majority to violate the individual rights of human beings, that individuals have constitutional right to free speech and to assemble and to worship and to engage in humanity that are not subject to the political process. So there is a balance between the individual and the community that is really important in the democratic Republican form of government that we're supposed to have. And so government local, state, or federal government cannot violate the constitutional rights of we the people individually. So if a corporation has constitutional rights or is a person with constitutional rights, it allows corporate lawyers to go into court and overturn democratically enacted laws, which means environmental protection laws, worker safety laws, public health laws, and even campaign finance laws are all subject to being overturned, even though they are the will of the people, because corporate lawyers convince judges that those laws somehow violate the, quote, constitutional rights of corporations. So the notion of corporate constitutional rights is not only illogical, it is also at its core a way that the ruling elite have stolen our sacred right to self-government. And most offensively, they use the legal system to legalize the theft and tell us that we are not allowed to complain when environmental laws are overturned or worker safety laws are overturned or public health laws are overturned. And we at Move to Amend say, ya basta, enough already. We need to build a broad and deep and loving and compassionate and fierce and firm social movement that says this is our Constitution, it's our country. We have not only the right, but we have the responsibility and duty to change the current racist, sexist, class-oppressive society that we live in, and we intend to win.
All right, David, I love it. Wow. So how do we do this?
Well, it's quite easy to describe, simple to implement. By that I mean this, that the U.S. Constitution provides the mechanism for its amendment in Article 5, and it requires either two-thirds of Congress to propose an amendment or two-thirds of the state legislatures to suggest a constitutional convention, at which point anything that's proposed is a proposal, and then the proposals go before the state legislatures, and it requires three-quarters of the state legislatures to approve it. Of course, we know that the Constitution has already been amended 27 times. It's not something that's easy to do. It is, as they say, a heavy political lift, and yet it's been done 27 times. And, of course, many of the most important improvements in social conditions have come about specifically through the constitutional amendment process. For example, the abolition of slavery, women getting the right to vote, the guarantee of the vote for an equal protection. These were all accomplished via the constitutional amendment strategy. How do we do it? We do what all social movements have done. We begin to engage one another in honest conversation about not only the situation that we're in, but also about what it's going to take to change it. We begin to question the cultural assumptions about how society is and how it must be. We begin to ask ourselves, is it possible to create a new world? And then we begin to organize, we educate, and we agitate. And I mean that very clearly, Lauren. We must commit ourselves to peaceful, loving, but militant action in the same fashion that Gandhi did, that King did. You know, we have to be willing to disrupt oppression and exploitation whenever it happens, and we need to begin the process of creating a loving and compassionate world as we do it. At Move to Amend, we are implementing these strategies through study groups. We are implementing these strategies through resolution campaigns. We are implementing these strategies through canvassing and listening projects. We are initiating these strategies and tactics through putting Move to Amend on the ballot. And by every conceivable measure, Lauren, the Move to Amend campaign is getting larger, stronger, and better organized.
Wonderful. Wow. Well, I know you have gathered a lot of people who are now connected with Move to Amend and working with you. What is it looking like now? How has the campaign grown?
Well, Lauren, as you know, you and I have known one another for a few years.
Yeah.
I want to contextualize and the work that we've been doing, trying to educate around corporate constitutional rights. I've been doing it for about 15 years. But the Move to Amend Coalition is actually new. And the Move to Amend Coalition actually was only formed in 2010 in response to a Supreme Court decision known as Citizens United versus FEC, at which point the Supreme Court stripped away the last of the campaign finance laws afforded to us through McCain-Feingold. But of course, Citizens United didn't start the problem. It was just the most recent example of the problem. The point I'm making is that Move to Amend was formed only in 2010. And today we have approximately 300,000 Americans who are actively participating with us on an ongoing basis. If any of the members of your circle would like to join us, as you pointed out, it's very easy. The website, www.movetoamend.org. But in addition to the 300,000 individuals, we also have several thousand organizations that have endorsed our effort. And I would lovingly, respectfully ask if perhaps CircleWorks and or the Gene Houston Foundation and or any of the organizations and groups that any of the Circle members listening now participate with, we would love to have the endorsement of any additional groups as we continue to expand and grow this movement. But it's not just organizational endorsements, Lauren. We've also helped to create 175 local affiliates across the country, literally from Miami to Seattle, from San Diego to Maine, and literally all points in between. In every state, there are Move to Amend organizers organizing and educating where people live, work, and play in our own communities. And not only 175 local affiliates, but we've helped to pass 500 resolutions at the city and county level where governmental agencies have gone through a process by which city councils or county commissioners have voted to approve and support the Move to Amend campaign to abolish the illegitimate idea that a corporation has constitutional rights. And we have put this issue on the ballot in 28 different communities where people get to weigh in and vote on a citizens advisory themselves. And Lauren, out of 28 times, we've won 28 of them. We haven't lost a single one, and those elections have taken place in locations where you might expect, like San Francisco or Madison, Wisconsin, and other liberal communities. But we've also put it on the ballot statewide in Montana and won. We've put it on the ballot in rural Ohio districts that have 3/4 of their registered voters registered in the Republican Party. And we put it on the ballot in Brecksville, Ohio, where that is true, and we won there too. The point is, Lauren, that Move to Amend has learned to talk to people that cuts across political ideology. It cuts across political labels and the two-party system. We have Democrats and Republicans and Greens and Libertarians all coming together to say we may not agree on issues, but when it comes to the principles of how our Constitution is supposed to operate, we agree only human beings have constitutional rights. Neither corporations, for-profit or non-profit, can claim constitutional rights. We believe in the principle of a democratic-republican form of government. So again, it's actually working, even though corporate media has never covered this growing movement a single time yet.
That is very impressive, David. This is amazing, the work you're accomplishing. And I think this is really key, how you are really educating people on the principles and building agreement on the principles. We see so much happening today to divide and conquer, to separate people and polarize them so that they get caught up in issues that in many cases simply either do not deserve that kind of attention and money and everything else, but also are very destructive to communities. But you're just not allowing yourselves to get pulled into those skirmishes and those polarities. This is very impressive.
Well, thank you. And I do want to say, Lauren, I think it's completely appropriate to have political disagreements on policy issues. So I'm not saying that nobody should engage those. In fact, I engage them as well. There is a time and a place to really hash out and have differences of opinion upon issues, because sometimes, there are yes-no questions posed, and sometimes you can only cast a vote for one person, and so there are mechanisms that takes place. However, I would actually remind listeners that those are issues that the principles and values of how the Democratic Republic are supposed to operate are different. And that's the reason that we refuse to allow ourselves to get pulled in to issue disagreements and instead stay focused on we are supposed to have a Democratic Republican form of government, and corporate constitutional rights and money is speech do not allow the container and the process for making and implementing decisions democratically to occur.
No, I totally hear you. I mean, there certainly are legitimate issues of policy that have to be discussed, and there will be disagreements always, but I hear you in Move to Amend are really sticking to the principles of democratic Republican, a Republican democracy. Or Democratic Republic. How shall we say this? We don't want to sound like a capital R.
Well, it is a capital R, and it's a little d, and by that I think it's important to recognize that democratic is an adjective, republic is a noun. And in other words, a Republican form of government simply means a form of government where there is a representative government, where there are people elected to represent the interests, so that you do not have a direct democracy where we vote on every single issue, but instead you have a system of laws and a system by which people are elected. But it is democratic in the little d sense because it says it recognizes that simply because it's a system, a rule of law, that laws cannot violate the individual rights of the members of the society. So actually, calling it a democratic republic is the correct way to both use the adjective and the noun, and to recognize the beautiful framework that says our individual liberties are sacred and sacrosanct and must be protected, and we have a communitarian process by which we make decisions about public policy. There really is a beautiful dance in a democratic Republican form of government, and we, frankly, are not doing it as well as we could, but we're getting better, and sometimes, we go backwards rather than forwards, but the arc of the universe is long, and it bends towards justice. That's what the great moral philosopher Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us of. And I believe that's true, and I also believe this, Lauren, the arc of the moral universe bends more rapidly when people roll up their shoulders and get to work.
Yes, I hear you, David. So true. So, I think there are an awful lot of people out there, including our listeners, who get pretty frustrated at the idea that, hey, our representatives are supposed to be representing the views of our communities, and yet we feel like that's not happening. How will the work of Move to Amend, how will amending the U.S. Constitution bring more connectedness between our representatives and we, the people?
Well, first and foremost, let's recognize that the real power of the people happens whenever we do get connected and work together. I don't actually think that the greatest political expression of power with one another happens at the ballot box or lobbying an elected official. I think the greatest act of power politically happens when we get together and have interconnected conversations and recognize the shared humanity that we have with one another. another. And that's one of the things that Move to Amend is doing so well. And we're doing it from the bottom up, the grassroots up, which is something that I'm really proud of. We didn't start in Washington, D.C. We didn't start with the nonprofit industrial complex. We didn't start with special interests. We actually started with ordinary people across the country. And I also want to lift up the fact that we have a 12-person national leadership team on Move to Amend, and of that national leadership team, Lauren, I say with humility and also sincerity, I am the only white man. So of 12 people on a national leadership team, I'm the only white man. We have 7 women and 5 men. We have 7 people of color and 5 white folks. The point is that we have made an intentional, deliberate effort to reach out to and make sure that we have leadership from impacted communities, people who have been who have had to struggle in order to have power in this society. So we actually invest a great deal of time and effort on those kinds of connectedness before we actually step into trying to get connected to our elected representatives. We think that the work needs to be done to build power in our local communities and with one another and build trusting relationships with each other before we get caught up in lobbying elected officials, because that actually has historically been a place where our power is diluted rather than expressed.
This is music to my ears, David. This is music to my ears. I don't want to go to Washington, and I think it is essential that we build power with one another and have these conversations that enable us, as you say, to recognize the shared humanity that between us all, and that when we actually do work together, this is the power. This is how we experience and express the power of we the people. So maybe tell us about how might one of the local affiliates get started? How might this local building of power together? What's an example?
A good example, and I really want to lift up the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which is a peace group led. It's not exclusively women, but mostly women. Men are allowed in the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, but the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom has created an amazing study guide called Challenging Corporate Power, Assert the People's Rights. And it actually goes into the history of not only the rise of corporations and corporate power and corporate constitutional rights, but also examples of the great social movements that have made this country a more peaceful, more just, more democratic society. And I mean, of course, the women's suffrage movement, the trade union movement, the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, and drawing lessons from those so that we can actually see and situate ourselves in a historical context. So one thing that many groups do as they get started is to spend 6 weeks together in a weekly basis, just a once-a-week meeting where they do some joint reading and then sit in circle together with a rotating facilitator to actually go through that process. And what we found is where those affiliates have started that way, not only do they have a much deeper analysis about, frankly, the political problems and the economic problems that we face, but they also have developed a real strong bond with one another and a real cohesion with one another. They get to know each other. Because those meetings also, you will not be surprised, involve potlucks where they eat together, food that they've brought together. So it really builds community. So the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom curriculum is on the Move to Amend website, and that is a very effective way for a group to get started. Another way for a group to get started is to work on a resolution campaign in your community to convince your city council or county commissioners to endorse and support Move to Amend. And that's a more traditional kind of campaign that folks are used to where you galvanize community members and go out and seek and receive endorsements for your effort from other organizations and organized constituencies. And yet another way to do it is by organizing a citizens initiative process like our friends in Mendocino County did just last year, where they put the issue of a constitutional amendment on the ballot at the entire county of Mendocino County in California. So there are multiple ways to actually get started, and there are examples of that. And if any of your listeners would like to actually go through a step-by-step process, I would encourage a telephone call to the office at 707-269-0984. And one of us will literally walk you through wherever you are and what your particular circumstance is, and help with the process of what makes the most sense in your own community. Because, you know, Lauren, the rural community is different than an urban community, and it's different than a suburban community. You know, the Northeast is different than the Southwest. But at the end of the day, we have the most power wherever we live, work, and play, and we at Move to Amend invite members of CircleWorks to explore with us different ways to partner and collaborate to build this movement together.
Wonderful, David. This is very exciting, and I really appreciate your comments about, as you say, every community is unique, and rural is different from urban, and we have class differences, all kinds of differences among our communities. When we can build community right where we live, this is going to be the greatest strength, and where we have the most in common, right, to start. I love the fact that people can just call the office and get that walk through to get going. This is fabulous. I know that here in northern Humboldt, you worked for years and years with Democracy Unlimited, which seems to be seems to really have nurtured the early days of Move to Amend, and you've built so many campaigns for democracy right here locally, as well as training a lot of interns who I'm sure are taking the work out. Huh?
You're right, Lauren, and I am very proud of the work that we did at Democracy Unlimited, which was a community organizing collective trying to put into practice the idea of democracy and the idea of creating power and exercising it deliberatively together. And we did things like the Community Currency Project and Community Supported Agriculture. We had an independent business alliance where we were connecting local independent merchants to consumers and showing folks the importance of buying locally. We did skill shares and we did pancake breakfast. I mean, we really were and still are a community hub in our local community. But what we realized was that no matter how good we were in our local community, if there weren't others in their local communities doing the same work, that ultimately the corporate capitalist system was going to devour us. And we realized not only does there need to be this work going on throughout the country and in every bioregion and every watershed throughout the country, but that we needed to be interconnected to one another. And so, as horrible again as that Citizens United decision was, for us, we saw it as an opportunity to really launch an effort to help grow similar efforts in every community across the country and to interconnect them through the Move to Amend coalition. And I'm very proud to tell you that one of the things that we do, for example, is to host monthly webinars and training sessions. We hold monthly coalition debriefing calls, so twice a month at different times. So twice a month, we are either having a coalition call, and then 2 weeks later we're having an actual skills training session. In addition, Laura Bonham, who I know will be joining us soon, is
I'm here.
Oh,
hi there, Laura. But yeah,
I was just about to talk about how we use our internal list not to fundraise, but to actually give people informative information and analysis. So maybe I could just turn it over to you for a moment, and we could hear from you a little bit about how we're building the movement and the connection by actually talking to one another and what that means to us.
We have, thanks, David, and thanks,
wonderful.
Lauren.
Hello, Laura. So glad you're here. Yes, go.
Well, we are constantly, even at the national leadership team level, doing more and more analysis and more research so that we can, when we talk to people and are helping people along, we are enriching their knowledge as well as our own, and we do regular blasts to email messages to our membership, which isn't all about give us money, but it's about helping to inform people about decisions the court is making or legislation that is all tied up with the influence that corporations and artificial entities have over us, as well as anything having to do with campaign finance funding as well, and money is speech. So we're constantly keeping out an eye for what's going on in the world to inform people, to add more ammunition to their arsenal when they are out campaigning for our democratic republic. And we also have a radio show once a week where we have on Blog Talk Radio, which is on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And there we have guests from all kinds of different organizations that inform about the work that they're doing, so that we're interconnecting to different organizations. And what we're finding, I missed the first part, so David probably already said this, but what we're finding is that 9 times out of 10, the inability to achieve success is because of these artificial entities, and this money that's pouring into the campaign just stops us from getting point A to point B. So we have we spend a lot of time in communicating. We're building out our social network in every way we can. We're making a documentary, which we're all very excited about, with Dennis Traynor Jr. So we're using every tool that we can find to communicate on a local level, at a state level, and across the spectrum from coast to coast, to keep people connected to each other and to what's happening.
So, Laura, let's go back for just a moment. You made a big statement, which I'd like you to unpack just a little bit about. You said, well, David probably already said this, but he hadn't. So maybe you can go back to how money is disruptive, what that looks like day to day, week to week, month to month, for Move to Amend and for all of us in democracy.
Well, what I was thinking of was a question that at the back of my mind that you asked earlier about how passing this amendment would affect us. And one of the things that it would do is getting away from the there's 2 parts to the amendment, so getting away from the constitutional rights, taking away constitutional rights from corporations and other artificial entities. There's also money is not speech. And
right.
The Supreme Court decision, Buckley versus Vallejo, where campaign finance rules were created and all, they basically, the Supreme Court basically created the doctrine that money is political speech. And with rights to participate in elections that these artificial entities have, it's damaging our ability to have a truly representative government. Is speech, and somebody's got an awful lot of it. They talk a lot louder than we can as individuals, which is part of the reason why it's important for us to be building at a grassroots level and helping to build, interest in a movement, the social movement, so that when we're finally get to that critical mass and we begin that effort with Congress and lobbying, our voice is louder than their money.
Right. Wow, that's very important. It's crucial. Thank you. Well, let's see. Wow. So Laura, now do you actually have this radio show? I think, are you doing the radio show, or does the National Committee rotate through the radio show? How does that work? And also, let's make sure we ask David any more questions you think you want him to hit before I know he'll need to depart soon. So,
well, if you have another question for David, I can answer that one after he departs.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see. David, maybe trying to think what... Well, one thing I wanted to say, and I don't think it really is a... You spoke, David, to why voting is not enough and why we really need to organize at the grassroots level. And, in many ways you've already answered this question, but I'd like to know, again, David, what gives you hope? I mean, this is a long-term campaign. You have to be looking pretty far into the future, farther than many people look, and Move to Amend needs to hold that future vision very strongly. What gives you hope, David?
Well, I'm going to answer that question two ways. One, I'm going to get very, very personal, Lauren, and tell you that one of the earliest memories I have of any sort of awareness of things of political import actually happened when I was a very little boy. I'd say 6 or 7 years old. And it wasn't a political lesson, but it really was. And it goes like this. My brother, Tyrus, and I were playing with our cousin, Joe Michael. There were 3 of us, and we were playing, and we ended up, I'm embarrassed to say, but not really because we were only 6 or 7, but we ended up fighting over a little toy car. And I will never forget, Lauren, because Mama came because we were yelling and screaming at each other and fussing. And I'll never forget because she didn't just come to us and stand over us and talk, but she crouched down and got at our same level where we were on the floor. And she first put her hands on all of us and just lovingly calmed us down, right? With her soothing words and just said, "Shh, it's okay, what's going on here?" And she took it. It wasn't like it didn't require, I don't think, immense patience because it doesn't take that long, but it does take some patience to just go through that calming process. And then she said something that was so important. She said, "Look, there are 3 of you here. Remember, we've learned how to count. Let's count together. 1," and then she pointed at Tyrus. 2, she pointed at me. 3, Joe Michael. Let's count again because you've learned how to count. Let's count. And she got us in unison collectively counting. 1, 2, 3. There are 3 of us. And then she said, "And look, there's only 1 car, just 1. So either you can take turns sharing the car or look around at all the toys that you have that you always play with. There's so much." She taught us, in essence, that there is a culture of plenty if we shared. And here was the punchline to that story. She said, because there's 3 of you, only 1 of this, and there's enough to go around if we just share. And you know what, Lauren? That made sense to me. It made sense to me then. It makes sense to me now. There's enough to go around if we share. There's enough wealth. There's enough clean air and clean water. There's enough money. And you know what? There's enough power. There's enough decision-making authority if we learn to share it with one another. So to me, what keeps me going is the knowledge that if a 6-year-old little boy can actually be taught a lesson like that, then anybody can be taught a lesson like that. And then the second bigger picture thing that I keep in mind is the knowledge that throughout all of U.S. history, systemic transformational changes have been made. And I don't just mean changes from one political party to another or one administration to another. I mean changes in the way human beings relate to each other, how power is exercised. And think about it. the abolitionist movement, the women's suffrage movement, the trade union movement, the civil rights movement, second wave feminism, the anti-nuclear movement. I mean, every one of these movements, when they began, seemed utterly and completely impossible. But because ordinary people like me and Laura and you and every one of the listeners of Circle Works actually believed that we have to be able to make change, and we began to have honest conversation with one another, and we committed ourselves to that change, the world changed. Because at the end of the day, Margaret Mead was right. Never doubt that a small, committed group of human beings can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's what gives hope every day.
Wonderful, David. Wonderful. And you will be happy, by the way, David, to know, since you really haven't had much experience knowing Jean Houston, that is a phrase she uses a lot, because Margaret Mead was one of her mentors, and Margaret Mead actually lived with Jean and her husband the last 6 years of her life. So, yes, we truly join you in believing that it is the small group of people who really makes a difference. Thank you so much, David. I know I need to let you go, and I'm so appreciative that you brought Laura onto the call to stay with us, knowing that you had this conflict. Thank you for your vision, your hard work, and your hopeful and energetic speech to help us understand.
Well, thank you, and I know you're in good hands with Laura, not only for the questions that you have, but for your Circle Works members who stay on for those questions. And I will conclude with another loving and gentle nudge to ask that Circle Works and the Jean Houston Foundation and organization that your members are working with, we would love to have an organizational endorsement of our campaign to abolish the illegitimate idea that the corporation has constitutional rights and money is speech. And that information is also on the website, or you can call the office, 707-269-0984, and we'll walk you through that endorsement process as well.
Wonderful, David. We will do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Much love to all. Bye now.
Wonderful. Bye-bye.
Well, and thank you, Laura. This is Lisa Nelson, also on the call. We're going to invite all the participants to ask questions. So for the participants, if you can consider what you've heard David and Laura talk about and what you'd wish to learn more about. Also, when you go to the foundation website, jeanhoustonfoundation.org, you'll see a beautiful logo for Peacemaker Circles by Trish Broisma, honoring when the Peacemaker showed how one arrow could be broken easily, but a unity of 5 bundled arrows can't be broken. And if you haven't already, please register for the Peacemaker Circle series. It's only $75 for the year long, and the funds enable us to continue this work. And you can also order a manual for the Peacemaker there and sign up for the Circles Work newsletter. And then come back for more eminent peacemakers. Okay? So I'm going to turn it back to Lauren to begin our experience of a virtual circle.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. So good evening again to all of you who have been listening carefully to David's energetic sweep of how corporate citizenship has become such a challenge for us, and the potential for evolving our democracy with the efforts of Move to Amend and the efforts that all of us can make. So I would like to break us out very shortly here into virtual circles for 12 minutes so that you can discuss with one another, 3 other people in your circle, what you are passionate about, what has come up this evening that really ignites your passion, and your questions for Laura Bonham of Move to Amend when we return to the large group. So as we break out into circles, first, if you will do a round where you introduce yourself by name and where you live, and say one word to capture what is your inner weather tonight. We'd like to know who am I talking to now, and who I'm talking to today may be very different from this same person I spoke with yesterday. So let's find out who you are today. Then get a volunteer facilitator who will also scribe and do round 2. Take 1 minute to say what I'm passionate about and what I burn for in bringing about greater democracy is, and then discuss and decide a question to ask Laura Bonham and move to amend. There may be time for a couple of questions from each group, so please do scribe your questions and come back ready to share those. We'll start in just a few moments with ringing a bell tone, and you will hear this sound as we begin. That's the sound. And then we'll ring it again when you have 2 minutes remaining in your circle. And then we'll come back to the main room so you can ask your questions. So once again, round 1, my name is, I'm from, and a brief phrase about your inner weather. And then a second round, what I burn for in creating a more robust democratic republic is. And please talk with one another and bring back your questions. Again, if you have any technology problems, press 5 on your phone. We'll check in with you. Now let's have the bell and have a great time in your circles. We're back to the large group, and
wow.
Yes, I can tell you are in deep conversation, an intense conversation. Wonderful. So I would like to invite anyone to raise your hand with a question for Laura Bonham. And the way you can raise your hand is by punching 1 on your phone pad. And that will alert me and Yarrow to the fact that you have a question to ask. So I invite you to raise your hand. All right, Linda Strahan has a question.
This is not, in some respects, it's not really, really deep, but it's really, really practical. What is that telephone number again to call?
Aha, very good.
Coaching.
David knows it by heart, but I hardly ever do. So I will...
Here, I think I wrote it down here. It is 707-269-0984. 707-269-0984. And that will be a great number to call. It is the headquarters of Move to Amend. There will be someone there to talk to you right away, and they can get you going. And if somehow you lose track of that number, it is on the website for Move to Amend.
And alternatively, you can send an email to info@moveamend.org.
Okay.
info@moveamend.org.
And one of our brilliant interns will make sure that you get an immediate response.
Wonderful.
Good.
Wonderful. Any other question you want to ask while you've got the mic, Linda?
Oh, I guess I was wondering, have you had, there's these various movements that come along trying to amend the Constitution, and you know what some of those are, which I'm sometimes never very sympathetic to. Has there been any kind of general wisdom that has shown up in terms of how you go about doing this so that you don't fall flat on the various shoals of the political processes, or is it just a matter of keep picking up and and going to another effort?
You know, I too have been concerned when I've heard about certain proposed amendments to the Constitution. We don't really seem to have that problem with this language. What we encounter more often is it's so hard to amend the Constitution. You know, people are just kind of deflated, and so sometimes we have to spend some time, you know, bucking them up. But
yeah, that's you know, I have my own resistances to people trying to amend the Constitution because of some of the things they want to amend it for, and I just, you know, I know that it's probably a good thing that it's so hard to amend the Constitution, but it also,
yeah,
you know, it also makes it daunting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, it does seem daunting, which is why we need to build the social movement and why we need to, just because it's daunting doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be done. And that's kind of the position that Move to Amend has taken. We know this is going to we know this is a longer term thing. We know it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of work, but it just has to happen. And so we're doing it. Mm-hmm. But we've thought about this. Move to Amend launched immediately following the Citizens United decision, but the founding organizations have been working on the issues of democracy for 10 to 15 years prior to that. There had been deep research and analysis, and through that, what we hatched the plan, which is to work at the grassroots level to passing resolutions and ballot initiatives and so forth, you know, getting states to pass, you know, a resolution, a ballot initiative, what have you, so that we'll get to the point where we have states who are actually passing initiatives that tell Congress to pass the amendment or else they will form a constitutional convention. And this has happened with a couple amendments before. The Constitutional Convention never happened because the one thing everybody in Congress can agree on is that they don't want one. They're not going to let the states get away with telling them what to do. Of getting states to pass, it actually forces Congress into action. And by the time we get those states passing, this language telling Congress to pass the amendment, we're going to have a big social movement behind us. It's going to be growing and coming to a crescendo at about. And so I don't think there will be a constitutional convention. We're preparing for that in case it gets to that extent, but we really think historically that Congress will act before the states actually call a constitutional convention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I find myself still in shock that we had an understanding until this court did its thing. And in my mind, we just need to change that court again because it was understood. It was understood that people are people and corporations are not people.
Well, it's a long history. There's in our outreach materials, there's a timeline, which is really an interesting thing to kind of print out and tape up, which shows the history of the Supreme Court where they expand rights to people and they expand rights to corporations. So at the top of the line, you've got the corporations, and at the bottom of the line, you got the people. And you would really be amazed at all of the decisions which date back to the 1800s.
Yeah,
that
I think 1870 something.
Yeah, that have created rights for corporations. And the original case that actually said corporations are people was Santa Clara versus Union Pacific Railroad back in 1887 or 86. I can't remember the exact date.
Is that when they were taking the rights of eminent domain kind of thing?
Yes, yeah. It was right after the Civil Wars. The railroads were expanding, and
they were just going to take people's property regardless.
Right, and and it was about taxation for them. They were being taxed, property tax, at the same rate as everybody else, and they thought that was just not right. And they won, and the court in a note said that they were people. They didn't actually decide it. There was just a note put on it that said, corporate, for these purposes, under the 14th Amendment, corporations are people. And that's when it all began. And the Citizens United is the one that really was the corker. Before Citizens United, we were having problems with campaign financing. I mean, campaigns were incredibly expensive even then. Now they've just gone totally through the roof. Mm-hmm. But before Citizens United, it was very difficult for an ordinary citizen to run for office. You had to be connected to money. You had to be, dealing with a special interest. You still had to do all this stuff. It was just on a smaller scale. But so Citizens United did us the favor of pointing out the error in all of these decisions. Mm-hmm. But it's been a long-standing problem.
That's a very good point, Laura, that Citizens United kind of put the point on the issue.
The maraschino cherry.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
The maraschino cherry.
Right, exactly. Well, Laura, would you tell us a little more about organizing at a grassroots effort, a local grassroots effort? How does this work, and what do you think are really the benefits and what are the benefits for us of being part of a local grassroots effort like Move to Amend?
Well, I want to start off with a little background and let your listeners know that I began with Move to Amend about 3 or 4 months after they formed, and I've been with them ever since. And what attracts me to Move to Amend and what makes Move to Amend different than so many other organizations that are working in this arena, some of the ones that are based in Washington, D.C., is that it is a grassroots organization. That, I myself volunteer a minimum of 40 hours every month to Move to Amend because it's a labor of love. And so do almost everybody in the organization, including at the national team. We pay a couple staff people, and then we have an intern program, but the rest of it is all volunteer, from the national team all the way into these communities. Everybody's volunteering their time, and that speaks volumes to me about the kind of organization we are, that people are willing to do that. But part of the reason that it being a grassroots organization appeals to me and why I stick with Move to Amend is because it's important for people to go through these motions of organizing and winning and even losing, but because it empowers a person. And when our amendment passes and we actually as citizens are able to govern again, we are going to need to be empowered. We're going to need to have local leaders. We're going to need to have state leaders. And this effort of getting involved in your community and organizing and reaching out and building coalitions in your community is such an empowering thing for a person to do. And it really, by doing it, you really understand your power as a free citizen in this country. And that's the beauty of this organization. It teaches you the leadership skills you need. It empowers you, and not just to do Move to Amend work, but in all facets of your life. And that, for me, is what makes this organization one of the best organizations I've ever been affiliated with.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. This is, I can tell, just listening to you, Laura, that you are a fully empowered leader, and it's very exciting to hear you speak about Move to Amend and what it can do for all of us. I realize that we've got just 3 more minutes. Does anyone else have a question for Laura, or that you would want to know where Move to Amend stands on anything of what we've discussed tonight, or what you're imagining as a local grassroots effort that seeks to not, as David pointed out to us, not just to restore or regain our democratic rights, but actually enable us in our democracy to evolve a democracy that gives us the full rights of a democratic republic that we know we deserve.
I don't know if David talked about signing our petition. Did he mention that before?
Not very much. So please, why don't you do that, Laura? Because that would be wonderful to hear. Yes.
Well, I heard David ask people who are interested to contact us about starting an affiliate, and I certainly hope that folks do, but not. Folks are busy. We do recognize that. We also need you to just stand up and be counted, and as a result, we're asking you to go to movetoamend.org, and right on the front page, you'll see a little button that says Sign the Petition. And basically, what you're signing is your support for our amendment. That will get you hooked into the loop and help us build our numbers.
All right. So are you planning to send this petition anywhere, or is it really for us to know who we are?
It's for us. It's a statement of we these people support this language and the Constitution. And the idea is to just let it grow and grow and grow and grow.
Marvelous. That's marvelous. And what gives you hope, Laura?
I get hope from doing this work, from all the different people I talk to, from people like David who have an encyclopedic knowledge of the subject, to a person who just contacts us and is interested in what we're doing and somehow wants to get involved and has never had any experience. I get to talk to and meet so many different people from so many different walks of life that it really enriches my life. And they're wonderful people. And knowing that these people are out there, they're in this world, they're in my country, gives me great hope.
Oh, that's wonderful, Laura. And thank you so much for coming on the call with us tonight. This has been a very rich conversation, and I have great admiration for the work you're doing with Move to Amend, and I think it's extremely inspiring to all of us to really see a grassroots organization working to connect local people as you're doing in a way that is both immediately empowering of people in the short term, and then, of course, this long-term goal of changing the Constitution, which really will bring us the full power of our citizenship. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, Laura. And I'll invite everyone. We are giving you all the big mic, and so everyone can speak up. We can say thank you to Laura and good night to one another. I'm so delighted to have you all on the call tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.
And thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you. We're all in this together, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful.
Yes.
All right. Well, good night, my friends. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Good night.